So screencast number 4 is looking at memory. So how do we remember certain skills? How are we able to reuse skills that might have been saved in our memory? And specifically for this screencast, we're looking at the 3 different parts that make up the memory ball. So memory is very difficult to define, but it's best regarded as a set of storage areas which are places to put information, plus a set of processes that act on what is in those stores. All of the information being received by the senses are stored in the memory, and the length of time that they stay within the memory depends upon their relevance. Now, the reason it's difficult to define is memory is regarded as lots of different things by different people. So you will see lots of different definitions, but this is your AQA specification, understanding or portrayal of what memory is. So make sure that you have a key note about this down in your notes. So as I said just now, there are places within our memory where information is stored, and there are 3 stores that makes up the whole process. Store 1 is the short-term sensory store, or STSS. Store 2, the short-term memory, or STM, and store 3, the long-term memory, or the LTM. These shortened versions are recognised, and they will give you a mark within your exam paper. However, if it is a long answer question, I would suggest putting the full name with the abbreviation in brackets, and then you can use the abbreviation further on should you mention that store again. So there are 3 processes that also occur within these stores. Process number 1 is encoding, which means putting information into a store or storing that information. Process 2 is maintenance, or keeping it alive. This is one of the most important ones, because in terms of encoding, I only encode information that is kept alive, i.e. it remains relevant. Our final one is retrieval, so finding that encoded or stored information and retrieving it to another part of our memory to allow us to use our experience or a skill or motor program that we have remembered within part of our memory. So you need to make notes in your massive table about each of the different phases or stages of the memory. So we'll start with short-term sensory store, and each bubble should be a separate box within your line of the short-term sensory store section. So first of all, key information or a note about our store. Each sense that we have collects information, and those senses that collect information each have their own storage compartment within the short-term sensory store. So for example, if I'm using sight or vision, that will have one compartment. Anything I hear, such as a call of a teammate, that will be within a different compartment again. Something I feel, potentially my grip on a ball or a grip on some equipment, and the pressure I feel within my fingers, that would also have another compartment. The STSS is very short, it only lasts half a second. In this stage we have selective attention, so because it's such a short duration, the information that we have is most important that it becomes relevant. The process is completed subconsciously, so there's no thought about the process, and the process that's occurring is the most important part is obviously we're gaining information. This word that you can see the red light hovering over, filtered, is our key part. Okay, so we said just now a process is maintenance and keeping information alive. So the short duration of this stage means that selective attention or filtering our attention to specific relevant information is most important, because it doesn't last very long. Information is kept alive only if it's relevant, so we focus in on it to keep it alive. Because it's kept alive, it is then encoded or passed on to the next stage. The capacity of the short-term sensory store is massive, so if we take in irrelevant information, it's not a huge problem. However, filtering that information makes sure that we only take forward into the next stage of the process the information that is most relevant to us. So our second stage, our short-term memory. This one receives information from the STSS, and it's also known as the working memory. And the reason being that it does the biggest job of all, because it, in the process of creating a performance of a skill, our short-term memory does lots of the work. So this time our duration is slightly longer. We're now up to a minute. So information will have to be kept alive, be focused on for up to 60 seconds. If information that's being encoded from the STSS isn't used within 30 seconds, it is forgotten. So that's why it's important that we maintain our focus on that important information that was deemed relevant and therefore filtered via selective attention in the STSS. Because of the fact that it only lasts 60 seconds and we need to be making sure that we're paying attention to certain things to maintain the relevant information and keep it alive. Things for coaches to remember is to keep things nice and clear and brief, because the longer something is, the harder it is to remember. And also they need to make sure we're paying attention. So is it interesting? Do we think it's relevant to what to our progression? Is it also something that is challenging enough, or have we done it before? And this one is linked directly with our capacity. So the STM has a limited capacity of just 5 to 9 items. So if we take an example, so maybe I'm taking a penalty in football. A couple of items that I might have taken from the display as important could be the weather. Is there wind? Is there certain wind direction that might affect my shot? Number 2, where is my goalkeeper at the moment in relation to me? Are they stood in the middle of the goal? Have I noticed they're just off centre, which might help me decide which way I'm going to kick the ball? The crowd would be something that's irrelevant that I filtered out because I'd want to be focusing on the task at hand. And the other one that I might focus on as part of my 5 to 9 items might be the referee. I'm waiting for that whistle. My hearing is alert, so I'm waiting for the whistle so I know I can go. Now, if there was something a little bit more busy, for example, it was mid-flow of a game, instead of having just 4 or 5 items that I've concentrated on for a penalty, I would have a lot more. So I'd be focusing on defenders, other attackers, where the ball is in relation to me. Is it just ahead of me? Is it directly at my feet? Do I have the ball? Am I watching the ball to receive it off someone else? So the number of items within our environment or our display is increasing. So we use something called chunking. So we chunk information together that will help us to maintain lots of information within that limited capacity. So for example, I could chunk together the position of the ball and the position of the attacker in my team that has it. I could then also chunk together the goalkeeper and the last man in defence and notice where they are. So they could be maybe central within the pitch and I might be out on the wing. So you're chunking a number of items together to create one item, therefore freeing up more space in the limited capacity of the STM. Same again in this, we have a process that's occurring. Maintenance of information, so we're keeping information that's alive, we're only keeping relevant information alive because of our limited capacity, and we keep it alive because we need to pass it on to the long-term memory to allow us to maybe learn it, to remember new information, to remember maybe an adaptation that we might have added because last time we weren't successful, so this time we'd like to be successful. Or we might be passing it on for a comparison. So I've done this before. What did I do last time? What was the outcome? So it's going to help us make a decision and help us try and be more successful this time. Final process then is the long-term memory. This one's receiving information from the short-term memory. The information that has been received has been encoded or stored because it's deemed that it's relevant. And like we said, there's 3 reasons why it may be sent here: for comparison, for learning, or for retention or remembering something new. The duration of this one is years and years and years. So if you think back, there's certain things you might be able to remember from when you were young. There's certain things that you don't remember, maybe you haven't used them in a long time, and that's to do with retention and retrieval, which is the process that is occurring in the long-term memory. So retention of information that's encoded from the STM, so we're retaining, we're remembering information that we're receiving. We're then also retrieving information that's been stored in the long-term memory so that we can compare it with our new information that's been encoded, and we can use that information or that comparison to help us make a new decision. Now, the reason that we might be able to remember certain things but not others is all to do with how often we retrieve that information. So if it's something we have to retrieve over and over again, so maybe your times tables, for example, that is something that you remember quite easily and it's retrieved quickly. If it's something what you had for dinner last week, that's not something that you need to remember often, therefore retrieval is slower and your memory or retrieval of that memory may not be as vivid or as quick. The long-term memory, in a sense, is a store of well-learned past experiences, so that they could be skills, they could be situations, loads and loads of different things, but most important are they are well learned. If something hasn't been learned very well, it's not very well remembered, therefore it doesn't necessarily stick in your long-term memory. The capacity of our long-term memory is limitless, but as I said, depending on how often you retrieve information will depend on whether or not it remains vivid in your memory. So, focusing on our long-term memory. So the work within the long-term memory becomes one of the most crucial aspects of the process. Okay? If we can't retain or retrieve information, we're not going to be able to use experiences to help inform our decisions. So retention is important because keeping information alive helps us to make those correct decisions. If we haven't focused on the information that's most relevant, it gets forgotten in our short-term memory after 30 seconds. Therefore, our decision we make isn't going to be quite as clear. The more information that we gain, the more we can use for comparison to past experiences. Again, it helps us in our decision making. And as a reminder, if we want to gain more information, we have to chunk things together to overcome the capacity of 5 to 9 items in the short-term memory. Retrieval is important then because it allows comparison of our current environment and situation with previous experiences, and then we can retrieve what we already know, comparing it with what we currently are experiencing or what we currently know, and then make a better informed decision. If last time the information I retrieved wasn't successful, what is similar about it now? What did I reflect on last time? Did I remember something, or did I remember a tweak in technique that might help me be more successful this time? So retrieval of the right information is very important. So retention and retrieval, as we said, remain those massive aspects. If we can't retain or remember information, we can't retrieve information, which affects our decision making. So key things that can help improve those aspects. Something is more likely to be remembered if it is rehearsed. Practice makes perfect. The more we rehearse something, the more we have to go into our long-term memory and retrieve that information, the quicker we can retrieve it because the more often we're using it. If something's meaningful, so if I believe that the information I'm taking in or the information that is being encoded is meaningful, it will help me progress, or it will help improve my team's performance, then I'm more likely to remember it. So that's why we link certain things with things that are meaningful. So like when you're younger, your parents tell you that it's very important that you remember your home phone number. If there's ever a problem, you'll be able to ring them. If you're ever in trouble, you can always then ask for help. It's meaningful to you because you need to be able to ask for help, therefore you're more likely to remember it. If something's learned quickly, it's more likely to be remembered. If it becomes drawn out, you start to lose relevant information. You don't encode all the key features, therefore the more quickly you learn it, the quicker it's retained, the more likely you are to remember it and learn it and be able to retrieve that information later. Overlearning is something we kind of link to experienced performers. So if something is overlearned, it becomes subconscious. You can perform it without too much thought. You overlearn something by practicing it over and over again. So if you think of the likes of maybe Ronaldo, his completion of a skill will be done subconsciously. The thought or the decision to complete a certain skill, maybe a step over to get away from a defender, will be something that he's overlearned. Therefore, he doesn't have to think too much about retrieving that information. Therefore, the skill is completed more quickly and hopefully successfully. So same as always, if there's anything that you're not really sure of, make sure you write down any questions. Please make sure you've made all of these notes. We'll start with a little bit of a recap, but not too much. And as usual, wouldn't necessarily recover lots of this information. More than likely, we will be applying it in exam questions or in examples. If you can also add in examples of each of these four means of improving retention and retrieval, that would be fantastic, because it will also help you when you come back to revise later. It will give you something that you can draw information from to help you apply your knowledge, which will give you your higher end grades.